Welcome to our Conversations in Healthcare. It's an honor to have you join us. I'm Rita Landgraf, and I have the opportunity to moderate our series. And we've had quite a few conversations in healthcare, and you will see them listed in our program. Tonight, we're going to talk about From Stable to Flourishing, redefining good health, and we have this wonderful opportunity for our specialist here on our panel to talk more about that. I did want to give a shout out to the University of Delaware's Employee Health and Wellbeing. They are the ones that sponsor our series, and also you are sitting in the College of Health Sciences, and this is Star Health. This is the campus. And if you have an opportunity, please take a walk down our hallway. We call that translational hall. And you will see the many clinics that we provide. On one side of our hallway, the left side has our clinics, and on the right side has our research labs. And we really talk about how to bring research into the clinics, have a look at what's occurring in the clinics and translate into research. So it's an opportunity really to focus on the integration between research and practice. So I'm going to ask my panelists here to give a brief introduction on themselves, and then we'll come back around for more.
Okay, my name is Kristen Weems. I'm an instructor in the Department of Behavioral Health and Nutrition on the nutrition side of things. So I'm a registered dietitian. I teach a lot of our clinical classes as well as our culinary classes. So my task is to try to teach our future health professionals how to cook and how to translate all that they know about physiology, biochemistry, and nutrition into actual practical recommendations that everyone can understand in terms of the foods that are nourishing and can help, prevent or slow down the progression of chronic disease. So in addition to teaching, I coordinate our foods lab, which is sort of a hidden little gem on campus, which is, for any of you who took home ec, it's basically a giant home ec kitchen. People don't know we're there until they kind of get the smells wafting down the hallway. So in addition to teaching, I also teach and coordinate some free classes that we run for employee health and well-being. We also partner with environmental health and safety and residence life and housing to do some special classes for students. And then I also do a lot of programming with some of our registered student organizations on campus.
Hi, my name is Vanessa Downing, and I am a psychologist by training, and have worked at Christiana Care for about 10 years now. For 9 of those years, I was a cardiac psychologist, so I worked exclusively with heart patients, usually from when they got their diagnosis all the way through to their time at home, and helping them cope with and live as healthy lives as they could. I will share with you, on the very first day of my job being a cardiac psychologist, my poor, overworked supervisor forgot that I was coming and said, well, why don't you go up to the units and get to know the people you're going to work with? And so on that very first day of working there, I walked around and asked people, what is it like to work here? And how are you doing? What did I get myself into? And it was as if nobody had really asked them before. People's eyes welled up with tears, and they talked to me about working in an acute medical setting. They talked about really beginning to care for their patients, care for their families, and then having really difficult things happen to those patients, and then being kind of whisked out of the room. The room was cleaned and replaced with another patient, without really even getting a chance to kind of catch up with what had just happened. And that was really kind of the most profound first day of a job I can imagine for myself, because that really planted the seeds for me that just nagged at me that we needed to take a better look at how well we were taking care of the people who provided care. And I thought for a lot of years that I was really alone in that little passion and interest, but it really wasn't. It turned out that a national conversation about this was beginning. And so now institutions like Stanford and Mayo are devoting really rigorous research programs to looking at the drivers of burnout and the high rates of depression. And actually, I think it's shocking for a lot of people to hear this, but physicians have the highest suicide rates of any profession. And that's hard for patients to hear. You know, we look at physicians and we think of them as the people that have kind of made it and that they're living dream lives in a lot of ways. But the pressures on the people who work in healthcare are really immense. And so over the past year, I've transitioned into a full-time role as the Director of Content Development and Training for a new department at Christianacare called the Center for Provider Wellbeing. We have a staff of 4, and it's been so embraced by Christianacare that we're in a really lucky position to be doing hiring soon. So we're going to be expanding. And so this thing that was a passion on day 1 has now really transitioned into something that has a lot of meaning for me. So I'm glad to be here today.
That's great. Well, thank you all for taking time out of your day. My name is Brittany Overstreet. I'm faculty here in the Kinesiology and Applied Physiology department. I wear a number of different hats, one of them being an instructor and teaching both graduate and undergraduate courses. I'm also a co-coordinator for our newly developed graduate program in clinical exercise physiology. And so within that, we train students to go out and use exercise medicine for individuals who are assumingly healthy, to individuals who might have chronic illnesses such as type 2 diabetes, various cancers, heart disease, pulmonary disease. In particular, we work with cardiac and pulmonary. We also work with individuals with Parkinson's disease and chronic kidney disease here in the local community. So I run that program, and we're actually bringing in our 3rd cohort of grad students this summer. We're very excited about it. I also coordinate the exercise counseling services here at Star Health. So as Rita said, walking all the way down the wonderful hallway, at the very end you'll find Nurse Managed Primary Care, where we offer not only primary care, but services such as nutrition counseling, health coaching, and then I run the exercise counseling services. So individuals come and hang out with us for a little bit with the students that are enrolled in the graduate program. We get to know you, we do some just verbal counseling, get to know your goals, your limitations, your resources. We do make you do a little bit of exercise just to get your baseline values and see where you're at. And then we actually develop a 6-week exercise program personalized to you, your wants, your needs, your goals, everything. So it's been a really great opportunity to be able to provide that service here locally to the community. And from that, we've been able to branch off into other community outreach programs. One I'm particularly involved with is called ANEW, which is Aligning Nutrition, Exercise, and Wellbeing. So I have a passion for trying to figure out how to really personalize a healthcare plan, whether it's exercise or being able to collaborate with wonderful people like you see up here, and making sure that we're really targeting all of the parts of wellness and not just one specific avenue. And believe me, it's overwhelming and there's a lot, so I'm excited today to kind of have that dialogue and those communications to see exactly how we can better personalize healthcare for each and every person.
That's great. And actually, Brittany, what you just talked about, as I look at the 3 of you, kind of resonates based on what you just said. So we have expertise here relative to nutrition and good eating. We have expertise here relative to psychological care, you know, and mindful care, and also as professionals, and especially in the health industry, how do we better take care of ourselves in order to better take care of others? And then, Brittany, we have you relative to how do we do that physical care too. And along those lines, I know that some of the research, Brittany, because I'm going to start with you from that exercising role, that you have done research relative to methods to promote positive and reduce negative psychological experiences in exercise. So what have your findings produced for us? I mean, is exercise thought of from, especially for those that maybe aren't athletes? You know, athletes organically just do that and they have a passion for it. But what about for those who aren't really passionate?
Great question. Yes, you just described pretty much the 3 to 4 years of my PhD in my life there. So if I start having flashbacks, don't worry. So no, when I usually call myself the evil exercise physiologist when I introduce myself. Not because I'm mean by any means, but because usually when I talk with people and people hear that I'm an exercise physiologist, I usually get a little bit of a physical pushback, whether or not, or just kind of a, all right, don't talk to her kind of thing. And I promise I won't make anybody exercise today, so we can just make sure that we're clear on that. But really when you think about exercise, for the majority, outside of our athletes or our maybe really, really highly active individuals, exercise doesn't feel good when we do it. We have elevated heart rates, we've got elevated breathing, we tend to sweat a lot, things get achy during and after exercise. And we actually know that from a psychological response that typically when we do behaviors that don't feel good and that we don't like, we avoid them. So think about something that in your day, that a behavior that you don't do because you don't enjoy doing it. Whereas there are behaviors that we typically do are because we enjoy doing them. Outside, there's a whole bunch of motivational things that can play into this, and I understand that. But at the core, we tend to do things that we like doing, we tend to avoid things that we don't like doing. So in exercise, we have a lot of these immediate negative responses, and then all of the good feelings that come with it, such as the weight loss that we might be aiming for, or the muscle mass that we might be looking, the strength that we might be looking to gain, those come, but they come down the road, and they usually take a lot of work to get there. So we don't have a lot of really positive reinforcements during exercise. And there's two pieces that play into all of this. So my goal, I was trying to look into ways to find exercise to make it more enjoyable. For whatever reason, we always think that we have to go straight to the treadmill and put it on 6 miles an hour and start sprinting. And that's just not the case. Exercise doesn't have to be this high intensity, super dragging, and really just kind of boring environment that for whatever reason, we as adults have kind of cultivated. So I was looking at ways, in particular, trying to incorporate things like television viewing into exercise or other distractions. Music is a big one. Social classes are another great way of including some kind of enjoyment into exercise. And the evidence shows the more enjoyable we make it, the better lasting the results are, and we start to move past that. It's actually really interesting when we talk about how we prescribe exercise. So if you come to me, what are my recommendations for you? Should you be doing moderate or light or hard and high intensity? Should you be doing it for 20 minutes, for 30 minutes, for 60 minutes each day? All of that is based off of really your current health status. So there's no one-stop shop answer for that. But when we look at this across the spectrum from being children all the way up to adults, when you look at the recommendations for children, play and enjoyment are absolute criteria. It says it right in the guidelines. Make activities fun for kids to do, make them enjoyable, find things that they like to do instead of making them, get on a treadmill, find another mode of exercise. And then you get to the adult recommendations and all of that goes right out the window. It's just do this and this long at this intensity. So we're really trying to break that stigma that exercise has to be this daunting task and really try to promote the idea of physical activity and exercise and the benefits and not only how we can make it enjoyable in the moment, but what are we actually looking for down the road with that.
That's great. We're going to talk more about that.
Okay.
So, Kristen,
yes.
In order to have the energy to actually do the exercising, how does food come into play? And what are the good foods that will support that level of exercise?
Okay, great. So I think the biggest thing in terms of myths is that people tend to think that there's sort of a one-size-fits-all, and people tend to, as a dietitian, I get the same visceral response. Who is the food police? I don't want to go near that food. She's going to talk to me about my plate ad nauseum, and that's all she knows. So that tends to be the reaction, right? And so I think people tend to think that you have to just follow my plate, and you have to do this, and you have to do that. But my philosophy is there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this. In terms of energy, we're really looking towards carbohydrates as our big energy source. But in terms of overall diet, it's really about nutrient density. So I always tell patients it's bang for your buck. So where can you get the most nutrients? So we're not talking about like added sugars and sodium and stuff, but where can we get quality carbohydrates? Where can we get fiber? Where can we get vitamins and minerals in the tightest, neatest, smallest calorie package, rather than, you know, a soda and a Big Mac, which is massive amounts of calories and energy, not a whole lot of the stuff that we're actually after. So in terms of fueling exercise and fueling health, it really does boil down to that nutrient-dense piece. How do you get everything that you need in that nice, tight package? And if you do that, then you have, I call it the guilt-free wiggle room, to squeeze in the little bits of Ben and Jerry's and the Haagen-Dazs.
So you're allowed to do that.
You are, absolutely. So, so how many people are like, have a sweet tooth? Who's got a savory tooth? Who is doubly blessed with a little bit of both? Yeah. So I was always savory. Give me potato chips. And then I had a baby, and I don't know what happened, and now I'm like, potato chips and ice cream, like I'll have all of it. Yeah.
Did you crave all that?
I did. I really went to the sweets, and so now that's kind of persistent. So now I'm doubly blessed. So we call that sort of discretionary calories. If you get all of the good stuff that you need in terms of vitamins and minerals and carbs and protein and healthy fat, and you got a little bit of energy left over because you went for really nutrient-dense stuff, you got some guilt-free wiggle room, which is what I call it. And that's really, I think for a lot of people, it's the enjoyment piece, right? So people don't generally love kale smoothies. I don't want to. But having those couple of bites of ice cream or something, I find that people do so much better when their eating habits are not about deprivation, they're about balance and enjoyment. And we throw around that term moderation, which I know I get a lot of eye rolls for. But that's really my philosophy, is that you fuel on the really nutrient-dense stuff, you allow yourself the good stuff, and then the big thing is, once you're full or you don't feel hungry, you put down the fork, and then hopefully everything takes care of itself.
I think it's a really good example, actually. I always, when trying to explain the hedonic response of we do what we like, we avoid what we don't, I use the apple and the cookie example, right? So you have a cookie and an apple in front of you, and maybe you like both of them, maybe you are having a hard time deciding, but at the end of the day, at least for me, I end up choosing the cookie over the apple because that's what gives me the greatest pleasure and the most enjoyment in that, again, immediate moment. So yeah.
And you get double points if you're eating the cookie while you're on that treadmill.
Oh, I like that. We should do a study on that one.
That's right. So Vanessa, when you were talking about creating that center to focus on how to take care of the professionals and many times the burnout. And probably all of us in this room at one time or another have that sensation that we have reached the max and we're starting to feel, either burnout or rusting out, when you remain in place but you're just rusting along the way. So what recommendations can you provide when that happens? And then I'm going to ask both Kristen and Brittany, because some of those strategies can come into play with food and mood, as well as what happens when we do exercise to our brains that can maybe counteract the burnout. So Vanessa, you go first.
Well, I mean, I'll say that I think that there's going to be even an unintentional theme amongst what we're saying here. I think that what we're noticing as a field is that by the time somebody's gotten to the point of burnout, we've really missed a lot of opportunities. The approach that we're taking is to try to be much more preventative and proactive, and really pointing out what I think, burnout for a long time was a four-letter word. It was something that people said about each other behind their backs.
Yes.
It was not something that was really recognized as a workplace risk factor. And so we're really trying to shift that conversation. This is not about people being weak. It's not about people not being cut out for it. Our healthcare providers are canaries in the coal mine. And you don't try to make a canary more resilient so they can survive the toxic coal mine. You change the coal mine. And so that's really where our focus is. It's a combination of not just looking at and promoting resilience of individuals, but looking at the culture that they're working in and living in, looking at the kind of leaders that they're working for, and looking at the efficiency of the work that they do. One of the most interesting studies I ever saw was that when we look at first-year medical students, their profiles psychologically, they are psychologically healthier than their age-matched peers. They tend to be more resilient than their age-matched peers. That starts to change significantly by the end of first year of medical school. When we look at them in residency, they have about 20 to 25% rates of diagnosable depression. So we're taking, really gifted, resilient people who have been hard workers their whole life, and we're putting them in an environment that does something to them. And so in the Center for Provider Wellbeing, we're really trying to say, yeah, absolutely, resilience is critical, but it's not something you need to go out and do on your own time and fix yourself. It's something that we want to bring more into the workplace, both in terms of, we want to bring all the evidence-based skills and little bite-size to you while you're on the job. And I kind of say this facetiously, but I think you might not need a shrink. You just might need to know what shrinks know. And if we teach you that about yourself, if we teach you what your brain wants to do on automatic pilot and what does it really want to do on automatic pilot when you put it in a trauma-rich environment. So that's really where the self-awareness piece comes in and the customization piece. So what I want for everybody who works in our healthcare system, really what I want for all people, is for them to become true experts on themselves. What do I need? What kind of exercise does my body seem to do, and where do I get hurt a lot? What kinds of foods seem to be better for my body? How do I know when I'm not okay? What does it look like for me at the end of the day when I am at the end of my rope? What kinds of behaviors do I seem to engage in when I can't take it anymore? And what does that do to my relationships? So if we tend to know what we look like when we're falling apart, self-awareness is about, what do I look like right before that happens? What do I look like right before that? So people can become experts on knowing what they need, and then in their environment, knowing who to get those needs met by, and not just going to the person who you happen to be married to, but really trying to find people who are really skilled in meeting the specific needs that you have. And sometimes that's a colleague, sometimes it's a friend. But having a high bar for yourself. Not only are you going to recognize the needs, but you're going to get a lot better at getting them met.
And Vanessa, I'm glad that you brought that up. We do have some students in the audience, and in particular pre-med. So how can they also be prepared as they are advancing in their studies relative to that type of rigorous environment? Because I think you pointed out some real critical pieces and some timelines that you're seeing in the healthcare space, although I'm very pleased to see that health systems are now recognizing the need to take care of the professionals as well as they take care of their patients. So any advice from that student perspective? Because sometimes these things aren't necessarily in their control. In fact, it feels many times that those environments are testing those students. So any advice relative to that from the student lens?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say that when we're social creatures, and we really like to think that we are in total control of what our life is going to look like. But when we look at studies of burnout in medical settings, the #1 predictor of how your life is going in terms of things like work-life balance and burnout is the average of how the people in your work unit are doing. And that's true when we look at medical schools and residencies. So if we know that that #1 predictor is the environment that we're marinating in, sometimes our most powerful moment is the moment of deciding. What does it seem like the culture of this medical program is? What does it seem like the culture of this residency is? What does it seem like the culture of this employer is? And then absolutely educating yourself about what are, if we focus too much on burnout, we can tend to just kind of end up in that direction. So a better direction to really put the bulk of our focus on is professional fulfillment. And does this appear to be a place where people have a lot of meaning in the work that they do? Is this a place where people have good camaraderie with each other? Is this a place where there's social support? Do people seem to have some control over what their lives look like day to day? Those tend to be the protective factors in terms of making the difference between people who are at higher risk of burnout and people who thrive.
And all of us can take that advice, regardless of where we're working or where we're studying. So that's very helpful. So Kristen, let's talk about food and mood.
Okay.
And, you know, how does food actually intersect relative to our mood? And maybe when our mood is in a certain way, like depression or feeling fatigue, like how do we then use our food differently to support a change of the mood?
Sure. So, I mean, we do know that there are some associated links with nutrition and certain mental health disorders. So we know that there's some links between omega-3 fatty acids and potentially depression. We do know too that, you know, if people are struggling with depression, nutrition is pretty low on the priority list. And so what I work with a lot with clients is, I think when we embrace or we try to embark on healthy eating, we only plan for best case scenario. I'm going to get up at 6, I'm going to exercise, I'm going to do my egg whites and my keto smoothie, and then we set ourselves up for failure because we've got this idea in our head of what it should look like, and then it hits the fan, or you get a flat tire, you're running late, and then you go on autopilot. And what's the easiest? You know, drive to McDonald's, eat a bag of potato chips when you get home. So I work with, you know, people that might experience fatigue. Maybe they have chronic fatigue disorder or something else in terms of problem solving up front. Okay, we'll talk about best case scenario, but let's have some plan Bs in place for those days when you're feeling really low, you're really tired, you're really dragging. What can you have in the house that's super easy, that you can put together that's still going to be healthy, and you know, you're not going to be reaching for the autopilot, easy solution. So I think sometimes we don't problem solve up front, we don't give ourselves plan Bs, and then things kind of fall apart. And then if you feel discouraged, then it's kind of that slide back into old habits. And I see that a lot with people where they get really discouraged, they feel like they failed, when really if we just problem solved up front and had a plan B, then things can move along a little bit better. In terms of specific nutrients, in terms of mood, I mean, one of the biggest things I always recommend when I talk to people is, how are you sleeping? Making sure that people are sleeping okay.
Did everybody get their 8 hours last night?
I have a 2-year-old,
so you're not getting there yet. Yeah, sometimes we minimize the value of sleep.
Right, yeah, and so we do know that nutrition plays a role in terms of what you eat later on, and you know, simple things like people tend to go towards supplements or, you know, sleep aids, but simple things like tart cherries and flaxseed are really high in melatonin, so having like a little bowl of granola with some dried cherries and some flax. You know, is it going to be the same as taking an Ambien? Certainly not, but it's going to be a heck of a lot healthier for you. You're going to get some fiber, you're going to get a nice kind of slow, steady carbohydrate release while you're sleeping, those kind of simple things.
And what about that comfort food?
Yeah, so I
suppose usually when you're feeling a little low, right, you're going for that comfort food, and then many times that like kind of works against you.
It certainly can. So I think we have kind of 2 ways to approach it. I work a lot in recipe development. So we have a YouTube series that the students own and operate. It's like a healthy video series. So they work on recipes and modify them so that they're healthier. So that's one piece. So things like, you know, people kind of go, ooh, I don't know, but cauliflower mashed potatoes, if you've had them before, they're awesome. No, you don't. Okay, I love them, but there's 2 ways to kind of skin this cat, right? You do the recipe modification route, or I really like to, because I don't like deprivations. I feel like it sets people up for failure, and then for just not enjoying stuff. I mean, some people are quite happy, they eat to live. Tell me what to eat, I don't really care. I know I live to eat. That's why I got into nutrition in the first place. It was med school or being a chef. Being a dietitian was kind of a nice happy medium. So I really like to work on mindful eating. So how many people clean their plates? Are you still hungry on the last 1 bite?
Sometimes.
Sometimes? How about the last 3rd bite? Not always. So why do you clean your plate?
Because it's
who's the voice?
It's there, and then I go. too many times without having the things.
Absolutely, right?
Not having the things first. Oh, my issue is, sorry. My issue with it would be not having the plate. I go too long without the plate. I do too much as a single person.
Yep.
Out of bag, out of fridge, in the microwave, stuff like that. And it's just whatever, I think I can get down between probably 8 and 8:30.
Oh goodness, yeah.
Because I take a long time to get home and chillax, and then I feel like, okay, now I'm ready to do it.
Yeah.
Instead of having, say, plan A, B, and C.
Yes, potentially C, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes it's because we're trying to cram too much into a short period of time. Sometimes it's the parent's voice in the back of the head that maybe that's like 4 decades ago.
Yes.
Clean your plate.
Yes.
What was always the reason why they're starving children in China is always told.
Yeah.
Wherever, but I mean, there's no magic portal that's going to transport that food. If only we could solve food insecurity that easily. So I find a lot of people, even with the comfort foods, you go back for seconds and you're not hungry. So I work with, one of our behavioral health faculty members does a lot of mindfulness, who I happen to be married to, so he's a nice little resource for me. But looking at mindful eating and really respecting that satiety, because I find for me personally, since I've honed that skill, my comfort food is mac and cheese.
That's a good one.
But like real, like the good
That's
stuff.
good.
Yeah. But stopping when I don't feel hungry anymore, because I always tell people there's a difference between being full and no longer being hungry. And starting to get in touch with that can be really, really powerful in terms of you put down the fork a little bit sooner. So even if we were talking about readiness to change. So even if someone's not ready to do much, if I can say one thing, always leave a little bit of food on your plate, because you decide when to stop eating, not the absence of food telling you it's time to stop, especially if you're at a restaurant. You plow through a whole Alfredo at Olive Garden, holy smokes, that's a lot of food, right?
It's a lot of calories.
Yeah, so the mindful eating piece I find is really important. So yeah, you can recipe modify, or you can start practicing that mindfulness, which is going to have, a whole host of other benefits, which I'm sure Vanessa can talk about. But it certainly can play a role in terms of weight management without deprivation. You can put down the fork a little bit sooner. The other thing too is preloading your fork. You're chewing, and what's on that fork? The other bite of food. So it really just propels that shoveling motion and not that kind of slow, steady enjoyment, right? So it takes that 20 minutes for your gut to tell your brain to tell you that you're no longer hungry. If you have a meal in under 20 minutes, there's a fantastic chance that you're going to blow right through that signal. The other thing too is that distracted eating piece. So I eat at my desk a lot. I don't know if you do too, and I'm trying to answer emails. There's been some fantastic research to show that distracted eating in front of a TV or doing work, or they actually had people play solitaire on their computer while they ate lunch. They had their ability to regulate how much they ate was totally changed. They ate a lot more food, and they actually ate more food later on in the day. It's like, so people tend to think that we can multitask. Our brains don't multitask. We can really sequentially process. We do one thing at a time. And so if you're distracted while you're eating, that brain is sort of just not capturing actually all of that energy, and there's a greater chance you're going to eat more at that moment and potentially later on in the day. So I know it's kind of a nostalgic thing, but sitting down at a table, no TV, no screens, and just sitting down and enjoying your meal can actually be a really powerful thing. If only we all felt like we had time to do it, right?
That's right. That's right.
Question. I'm single also. So here's the thing. I mean, ideally, you're sitting at a table having conversation between bites. Well,
By yourself.
yeah. What do you? I guess I could talk to myself.
I wouldn't do it in public though.
I would. Yes, exactly. So, what's a suggestion? I mean, for me, I usually am reading a book or looking at, something on the internet or whatever. And you're right. I zip right on through it. So, but what's a suggestion not to do that? What do you do?
That's a great question. So, now in terms of like brain physiology, I'm not sure how a screen would differ than a book. I would imagine reading a book would probably be a heck of a lot better in terms of the actual content, that's actually coming in. He's a book that can slow down and stop me when writing. You know, listening to music is one of my favorite things to do when I've got the house to myself, which is very, very rare. So I was
Something nice too, because you don't want to listen to something that like forces you to.
Yeah, like no heavy metal.
Right.
Yeah, but if you get your music on, you're still kind of, you know, I mean,
Right.
You know, you're not stopping to sing back necessarily.
Right.
You know, so I think that's a typical one for single people.
Absolutely.
That's one reason why we get so fast.
Yeah.
Maybe Kristen, you could do some more research on being single and.
I could.
I just gave you a new PhD.
There you go. There we go. That's a
I
good
did
question.
get to Brittany about also about the exercising side of this too. If we're looking at holistic health, how does exercise then come into play to kind of provide that counterbalance to the things that we've heard from Vanessa and Kristen to promote healthier beings?
Well, it's no surprise. I mean, with, you know, talking specifically about burnout in physicians, that at the end of the day, I doubt anybody in here has ever come home and not felt burnt out, right? Whether it's physically or emotionally, mentally, you just have that kind of foggy feeling, tired. I know that I experience that on a regular basis, and I think that many of you can relate as well. One of the, you know, there are a lot of barriers to making ourselves exercise. We know all of the good things that come from it. I'll talk about a few of how that plays into the mood and the energy in a moment. But we know that exercise is good for us. It's no surprise. It's no secret. It's no magic, you know, magic concoction. But one of the problems is obviously the barriers that why we're not doing that. So if anybody wants to share, any guesses as to what the #1 barrier for exercise really is? Why do people not exercise? What's the biggest barrier out there?
Time.
Time, lack of time, right? I don't have time. None of us have time because we're so busy with all of our other activities that are burning us out. The second one is actually not having enough energy. I don't feel like I can actually walk 30 minutes. I'm too tired. So the time barrier, which is more perception than actual lack of time in our day. But then you have the perception of being really tired, which is a really hard thing to overcome. However, one of the things, if you can put your shoes on and get yourself to be physically active, the hardest part of a workout should be starting the workout. After that, it's all downhill, unless you're walking uphill, I guess, in the park. But there's not too many hills in Delaware, so we can call it walking downhill. And so once you actually initiate that bout of exercise, it doesn't take very long. About 10 minutes into a workout, it's been shown that we start to have these positive responses. And as long as we're not doing anything that we really, really don't like, those positive responses are pretty universal up to a certain point.
And you said up to within the first 10 minutes.
So yeah, so it takes about, you know, a couple minutes for everything to get warmed up, and then we have our endorphin rush, and then we have some other psychological and physiological responses that not only do you get energy during the workout, so you'll actually start to, after a few minutes, you're like, all right, this isn't so bad, everything's loosened up, I can keep going. But then it's afterwards. We actually will perceive ourselves to have more energy after a workout than we do before a workout, despite how low that energy might have been after a long work day, or even just waking up first thing in the morning. So as hard as it is to put those shoes on, to put the exercise clothes on, or to make yourselves go do that bout, it's been proven that it really does help with the energy levels. It's just making yourself do it, which is hard. And maybe we can talk to you a little bit about some tips or tricks to actually having mindful eating, or maybe finding ways or certain aspects to helping overcome some of the barriers that you all do face. So I think that would be helpful as well.
So Vanessa, how do you create, to kind of follow that theme, how do you create more daily energy in your body to get ahead of that burnout? I mean, I think we're hearing some coordinated strategies. Are there others that we can add?
Well, I think having somewhat of a ritual. So I'll just to ask, how many of you do work in the health profession, one way or another, or preparing for it?
We're preparing for it.
Yeah, preparing for it. Yeah. So and I just want to ask, because this is such a mixed audience, how many of you have ever really needed to pee? and just didn't, because there was something that seemed more important in the moment, either the needs of a child or a pet or a partner or your boss or a patient. So put your hands up if you can admit that you, okay, so it's, you know, when I do this in a room full of physicians, everybody's hand goes up. But I think that if I were to ask, you know, a succession of questions about how many times did you not eat when you were hungry, or ate way past being full, or notice that you got home at night, and or whenever you get home, if you get home in the morning, and you were letting the length of a TV show dictate how long you were going to stay up. Even if your eyes were starting to close and you realized, oh, but it's only got 10 more minutes. Let me just... So we're letting kind of external things have a little bit more control over our intentional choices that are based on getting the messages from our body. So, you know, one of the things I think, whether you work in healthcare or in any setting, is to notice how efficient we all are at putting awareness of just bodily needs, putting that mute button on. Because what does everybody want? And what does every employer want? What does every patient want? We want the care provider or the employee who is fantastic at putting their own needs aside and putting the needs of the patient or the organization or the boss first. And I mean, I want that. I want a surgeon. If I'm lying there having open heart surgery and that surgeon needs to pee, I want her to be able to say, no, this beating heart in front of me is more important than I can prioritize. The problem is that for most of us, that skill, that is really a wonderful skill to have, gets stuck in that muted position. And so just that ritual of coming home at the end of a work day, or from your running around and doing errands or your tasks of the day, and sitting in the parking lot or in the garage and going home. Or one full breath in, one full breath out. Or all you're attending to for just 3 seconds is, I have access to oxygen, here it comes. Just that were really great. And if we do rituals like that, that sort of practice, after just about 2 weeks of doing it, we start to have a really different experience of being more intentional and of kind of catching ourselves in the act of doing these things that we do. And kind of laughing at ourselves and kind of being non-judgmental about it, where we can say, wow, I've actually had to pee for about 20 minutes. Why? There's a bathroom right there. Why didn't I go? And when we start to notice that we're doing that, we can move on to the more emotional heavy lift of, wow, I've been really angry for like a week. I've been snapping at everybody. I wonder what caused that. I wonder what I could need. Just when we start to get good at those rituals, then it comes more automatically throughout the day without needing a ritual to help us.
And the rituals don't have to be that comprehensive, as you're indicating. Just sometimes just taking a moment to breathe in and breathe out and be very intentional about it. And then how does that advance then to actually better understand what's going on with yourself?
I'll say there was a really cool study at Penn that looked at oncology nurses, and they did this intervention called Stop, Breathe, Be. And it's literally that. It's before a nurse walked into a patient room, before each patient interaction, that person went, stop. What am I about to do right now? And the nurses that participated in this reported significantly more vigor for their work. And vigor is energy. And interestingly, patient satisfaction scores went up on the units where they did this. And the people who were doing the work felt more engaged because they were able to develop their ability to attend to the moment that they were in with just a tiny little intervention like that. So a lot of times people think that mindfulness and mindfulness meditation, if I'm not doing it 45 minutes a day, I might as well not do it. That's really, it's not realistic for most of us, and it's not necessary for most of us. We just build that ability to attend to the moment the same way that you develop a muscle in a gym, by noticing. And a lot of different things can be the anchor that helps you notice. And, you know, sometimes pulling your car into your driveway is the best kind of physical anchor. Notice I'm home. Notice I'm off the clock.
And we do, as you notice, we have microphones that we can circulate. Yes.
So sort of to Brittany's point before getting back to sort of the tips or techniques, I think one problem that a lot of us face is that we get very overwhelmed with all of this health information at once, is that we're seeing everything in the media about nutrition and all of these things we need to do to be mindful and be less stressed and all of these things we need to do to exercise. And that in and of itself, I think people are just like, it's too much, I'm just gonna bail out. So what are some, sort of to each of you, if you could have one sort of takeaway or one place where people could start instead of, I have to change my entire lifestyle, what are a couple little things that we could do to kind of improve?
Sure. So I think when it comes to physical activity and exercise, I use those terms separately because they do mean two very different things. Physical activity has a very broad definition. It's really doing anything that raises your energy expenditure over rest. So even me sitting here, this is actual physical activity. Then we have the exercise, which is that structured bout that we think about when we go to the gym or go to the walk. And both of them have great benefits. There's kind of two sides to exercise, right? It's not just going to the gym or going outside and doing the exercise for 10, 20, 30 minutes. But it's also reducing the physical inactivity side of things. So doing things like choosing to stand instead of sit, to park farther away, to, I've heard these a million times, right? Talk about flooding from the news and everything. Choosing to take the stairs instead of the elevator. All of that has huge impact. It doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it really truly does. And so my first trick or my first kind of tip when people start with exercise is, right, what piece of equipment do I choose? How hard does it have to be? How long do I have to go for? What gym do I go to? It's just start with the absolute basics. Walking is the #1 form of exercise and physical activity, and it gives you all of the benefits. It gives you all of the benefits from any other aerobic mode, cycling, elliptical, rower, whatever it might be. It might not put on a lot of muscle mass, but for the cardiovascular side of things, it gives you exactly what we need when we're looking for kind of the big bang for your buck when it comes to exercise and health and wellness. So it doesn't have to be elaborate. If you can do 10 to 30 minutes, the goal would be to do 30 minutes each day. But 10 to 30 minutes, if you're starting and just kind of finding somewhere in your schedule to get that into, that's really where we need to start. It doesn't have to be this big, complex, crazy schedule or agenda or program or plan that a lot of times we get a little bit carried away with in the fitness and exercise world, because we can when the time and a place and the person is ready for that.
Does it have to be a fixed pace?
So most individuals, if you just go walk outside, we actually tend to walk at somewhere around 3 miles an hour, and that is exactly what we need. So I wouldn't encourage a kind of slow, daunting walk, but that nice just kind of walk where you can still have a conversation with a friend, that's perfect. Yep. It doesn't have to be a sprint either.
I would say there was kind of one most practical thing that I would like to plant a seed for in people. I want the opportunity to kind of introduce you to your brain a little bit, and to specifically know that everybody in this room has something called the negativity bias, and that is all about survival. Everybody in this room is descended from a long line of ancestors who were great at threat detection. And so what that means is the ancestors of ours that went on to procreate were the ones who knew what rotten meat smelled like. They knew which berries were poisonous. They knew which cave the bear lived in. They were the ones who could remember. And unfortunately, the ones who would say, a flower, and paid no attention to the sound of an animal creeping up behind them. Those are the ones that often didn't go on to procreate. So what ends up happening is that we have brains that are really made for exquisite threat detection. The problem is that means that negative information tends to stick to our brains, and positive experiences slide right off like Teflon. When we look at that from a cognitive processing perspective, the reason that happens is Because think about problems. Think about fights. Think about disagreements with people you love. Really what those are problems that need to be solved. So our brain experiences a negative event and chews on it. We are problem-solving creatures. And it says, what do I need to do to avoid that again? That felt awful. What does he think he's talking to anyway? So we think about it. We have feelings about it. We tend to talk to other people about it. Sometimes we type an email about it or write about it. So there are all these ways that our brain has to engage with the negative experience because it doesn't want to have that experience happen again. A positive experience, we don't really have much work to do. So when somebody comes up and compliments you, there's no problem to solve. It's just, aww. Anyway, we get right back to the problem solving because that's what we were made to do as a species. And you know, it's a blessing and a curse. It's gotten us really far as a species, but it's also gotten us to a place where if I were to ask you all about some of the most challenging things that happened this week, you would not only be able to give me a list of those things, you'd probably remember a lot of details about the experience as well. And if I asked you to list some of the most wonderful things that happened this week, you might have to scratch your head a little bit and kind of go back into the archives. So when it comes to practical skills, there's been really great research that shows that there's such a simple intervention that can turn this around for people, and it's called the 3 Good Things exercise. This comes out of Duke University. They have something called the Patient Safety Center, and they look at the relationship between how well providers are doing and how safe the patient experience is. And they've done a lot of research on this 3 Good Things exercise. So it turns out that after 2 weeks, at the end of each day, and ideally, you know, long-term memory is processed best in the hour or so right before we fall asleep. So the best thing that you can do is about an hour before you fall asleep at night, write down 3 good things that happened today, what feeling you had about it, and what role did you have in that good thing. It takes about 2 weeks of doing that for your mind to set a new habit. In the beginning, you tend to be writing things like, well, I woke up. Yeah, that's good. And, oh, yeah, I had a good meeting at work. At the end of the 2 weeks, people find that they're writing more about personal interactions. They're writing about things that tend to be a little more emotionally meaningful for them. And long term, when they go back and look at people about 6 months after they've done this 2-week intervention, it trends better than Prozac in terms of depressive symptoms. So if there were anything that you could do for yourself, I would say do this 2-week experiment of capturing 3 good things right before you go to sleep at night. And I think it's, you know, it's something that should take you about 3 minutes to do each day.
That's a great recommendation.
I mean, my big passion is teaching people how to prepare food at home. Now, it doesn't have to be a Julia Child exercise. You know, the bag of who Julia Child was. I'm reading the room, and I think most people know Julia Child. I try to drop these references in my classes. There was a movie too. Right. Yes. I forget who played it. It was Meryl Streep. But I don't know if that's it. Might help. So my big passion is teaching people how to cook food. So we know that people that prepare meals at home tend to be healthier. They tend to have lower energy intake, so calories, lower sodium, lower fat. The problem is that people are eating out more often than ever before. So about 30% of food dollars go towards takeout and restaurants, which is more than ever in history. And it's growing rapidly, especially in our youngest generation. So some market research found that the cereal industry, and in Delaware, yeah. So it's only going to get worse, right? So the cereal industry is apparently failing because millennials, cereal is too much work. So they did market research when Kellogg's and Post were like, what is going on with our cereal sales? And it's too much work because there's a bowl, and you have to pour it in, and the spoon. And I mention this to my students, and they say, yeah, we want stuff that's kind of grab and go, right? Give me a smoothie or my chia bowl, and I don't want to have to do the dishes. So they tried to put out these things called cereal straws, which I've never heard of, where you drink the milk through the cereal straw and then eat it. Oh, I know, right? Who knows what it's not? So we know that this is going to be a growing issue as fewer people know how to prepare food. And then the other thing I think people don't realize is that even if you're eating at the quote-unquote healthy restaurant, there are reasons that that food at the healthy restaurant tastes so good. They're going to use way more salt, they're going to use way more fat, they're not measuring out the butter and the oil, it's going to be a lot higher in calories, and the portion is going to be much larger than what you're going to have at home. So there's a real disconnect though, because culinary skills and confidence are extremely low in a lot of people, and some people will list that as the barrier. I know what I should be eating, but I don't feel like I have the skills or the time to do it. So I spend a lot of time working with people finding shortcuts, the bag salad, the pre-cut up stuff. You pay a little bit for the convenience, but you're still actually preparing the food at home. And we were talking about resiliency in medical students, and so I'm going to be teaching a culinary class for pre-med students in the fall. And so there's a little bit of research to look at culinary training is actually promoting resiliency in medical students, because the kitchen is a great place to have a safety net for failure. Everyone has had a recipe that they just horribly botch. And that can get our medical students and our future healthcare professionals, and really, our type A high achievers, used to the failure not being this absolute crippling issue that's going to have this trickle effect and turn into everything else. And then there's a lot of research too that just the act of cooking can be a major stress relief for a lot of people. I know for me, the act of chopping, it's like I love to shovel snow as well. I feel like really mindful in those moments, because you can't focus on other stuff, or you might lose the tip of a finger or something, right? So it's that moment to kind of slow down and get in touch with your food, and really start thinking about that awareness in the moment, and hopefully that can kind of carry over into the eating piece as well. So that would be my biggest recommendation is, if you lack the skills, come talk to me. I'm happy to teach you some skills. And then I kind of sneak in the nutrition education as well. How do we make kale taste better? How do we do? There are lots of different ways. You massage it. Has anyone had like a raw kale salad? You just kind of massage the vinaigrette in there, and then it softens and gets really velvety, and it gives you a bit of a workout, and you can get some aggression out on the kale, which I find really beneficial. So that's really my passion, and I think for a lot of people it's a simpler thing. It's just kind of getting back in touch with that very necessity thing. We don't pee when we have to. We don't prepare.
When we get older, though, you have to when you have to.
So yeah, if you can start preparing more meals at home. It doesn't have to be every single meal, and it can be shortcuts, but taking that time for yourself can be hugely beneficial.
It can be relaxing.
It can be relaxing.
Yes.
I mean, food is about more than just nutrition.
Yes,
it's social, it's emotional. And
presentation, it's about presentation.
Right, I mean, it's a great creative outlet. So I think for a lot of people, we don't respect those things enough.
Yes. So Brittany, healthy living and what it is and why you should care.
I think you did a presentation titled that somewhere in your research. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I feel like almost all of my presentations at this point have kind of that underlying theme and just kind of the importance for it, because for every single person, healthy living looks different. From day to day, what our goals for being strong differ. Whether it's actually being strong for maybe a competition that somebody is doing, whether it's a sports avenue, whether it's being able to get up and down the floor and play with a grandchild or a child, or just being able to walk upstairs.
It's more about like your own goals, like your own life goals.
Absolutely. And so, the thing is everybody has a preconception as to what they think healthy living should look like and what our healthy should be, because we're told what the dietary recommendations are, we're told what our exercise should be, we're told that we should not be sad, that we should be happy, and then we have all of the social aspects that play into this idea of what we should have, and that's just really not the case. Everything should be individualized and personalized, and everything, I think we need to be okay with our health and well-being being a little bit different than the person that's sitting right next to us. That's okay, that's how it's supposed to be. And so then I think the other part of that is, the why you should care is, again, why do you care? Is it because you just are being told that you should have better nutrients in your diet? Or again, is it because that those nutrients are going to give you more fuel to be able to do the things that you actually love and get through the day and be able to do it with more vigor and more energy and better mindset? So I think that at any point that I always try to bring all of those concepts into the presentations and really just try to reemphasize that everybody's journey is going to be completely different, and I think that we're getting better as a healthcare system of not only acknowledging that, but also having resources to provide the individualized care. So we used to, as an exercise prescription, just tell everybody to go out and do 30 to 60 minutes, and that's it. That was what we gave everybody. But again, now that we know that somebody with cardiovascular disease needs a much different exercise regimen than somebody with pulmonary disease, or somebody that's looking to lose 5 pounds is going to need a very different regimen than somebody who's looking to lose 50 to 100 pounds before bariatric surgery. So it's just not a cookie cutter anymore. And I think that, I think you have great examples of things that we brought up today. And I hope that, as we continue to be able to provide these more resources, that people will feel more comfortable coming out and seeking those out.
So I think that's really beneficial. So do you think that the healthcare system then will be the one that changes those messaging? Because society is getting the other message still. We are getting the message that we're not good enough unless we follow this regimen, and we are getting a lot about not having enough time to actually prepare a nutritious meal, so what's available to us many times is not the health content that it should be, and then we feel guilty that we can't meet that standard, and so that actually adds more insult to injury. So from a trending, we're actually still seeing the opposite. And when I think of Delaware, 60% of Delawareans are at an unhealthy weight, and that's why I brought up the sleep. One of the riskiest behavior that we've seen in our surveys has been sleep deprivation, and then how that feeds into other things relative to our health and well-being. So, how do we counter all this incoming that, is out in the marketing? Do you three, because you are the experts, do you believe that there are opportunities that we can counter that, because we do know that the majority of the people are actually experiencing poor health and poor well-being?
And I think that's where, the social determinants of health really come into it. I think it's the way we build our communities. I think it's the way we put farmers markets or not in neighborhoods. I think it's whether people live in food deserts or not. I think it's what kind of educational opportunities people have. And, before the talk, we were talking about, having patients who think that, Sunny D is a good fruit alternative, and that's not willful ignorance. That's never really having an opportunity to learn alternatives to that. So I think that there are real social policy ramifications that we really need to look at. I think, unfortunately, for a lot of this, there is a pay me now or pay me later. And either we, create neighborhoods where it's safe for people to walk, or people don't walk. I think either we make a neighborhood where somebody can walk to get healthy food, or it's not safe and maybe not worth it going out looking for it. So from my perspective, I think especially working with cardiac patients for so many years, I think we have still a little bit of talking about cognitive biases. There's something called the just world cognitive bias, and that one of the things that our brains really like to do with difficult stories or sad stories is we try to find the fault of the victim. We try to figure out, well, they must have done something wrong, because what that does for us is helps protect us from our fear that it could happen to us. And the thing is, the vast majority of people who end up with really difficult chronic diseases, sure, there are always some behavioral components to it, but there are often behaviors that are really driven by culture and the society that they're in. So I think that if we don't solve it as a community, we're going to pay the price as a community.
Great point. Any other thoughts on that as we're, you know, going against the current a little bit? And, you know, how do we continue to advance? I think you're right, Vanessa, some of those components. But are you seeing some opportunities that, you know, we can trend the other way?
I think definitely. I think the translational piece is really important. That, you know, the days of you publish a paper, you go to a conference, there I translate it, because that doesn't actually reach the people that need it. And I think we need to get a lot more creative with our messaging. When I think about nutrition and the loudest voices on the internet or wherever, they often have zero qualifications and are putting out some major misinformation. And so I think sometimes as healthcare professionals, we're like, well, that's not really our thing. It's got to be our thing. We've got to get the message out there.
Do you want to talk about your social media?
Oh, sure.
So I mean, you just touched that.
I did, yeah. So we have a healthy cooking series that we host on YouTube. So it's entirely led by nutrition students. And so, has anyone ever seen the tasty videos that pop up on Facebook ever, like the overhead? So we're doing those, but it's all done by my students in the foods lab. And so they come up with the recipes, they write a little eye-catching blurb, and then they work with Ashley Barnes, who's a videographer in the College of Health Sciences, and she films it all. And then we push it out, and hopefully it reaches a whole bunch of people. We've had a couple that have had a lot of hits. It's been really exciting. Because I think we really need to train our future healthcare professionals to embrace these new, unfamiliar mediums. Because, you know, just doing, I think about the number of patients I've seen over my career versus what, this is a terrible example, but people like Kim Kardashian can reach with one tweet. It just pales in comparison in terms of what our reach can be. So I think we really need to embrace those things. And that's where I work with my students. They make fun of me because I suggested we had a Facebook page, and they said, Facebook is for moms and aunts, we need Instagram. And I know, I like Facebook too. So I said, you guys, I'll set up the Facebook, and I'll supervise, but you guys send out the messaging, because I don't really know that kind of stuff. And they do it, so it's really going to be, and I hate to pass the buck, but yeah, I mean, in terms of the social determinants, it's got to be, we're going to teach our students to change these things, because obviously we've been reasonably ineffective at doing it. So that's really what I'm hoping to kind of promote with my students, is that they're the next wave of healthcare professionals that are confident with this medium, and really to embrace it as a vehicle for promoting, you know, evidence-based health messaging that can really help people feel empowered. So it's Instagram and YouTube and all these things that seem terrifying.
What's the address?
Oh goodness, it's we're buried. The university is pretty they're pretty tight with sending out stuff. Everything has to be supervised.
What if you went on YouTube?
If you go on YouTube, under the University of Delaware, we have the Department of Behavioral Health and Nutrition has a playlist, and it's under the playlist. We have a really beautiful, catchy name for it that we've been waiting about a year to get approved by the university. So it's quote unquote called You Delicious, which one of my students came up with, which is actually I think very clever. So, but only quote unquote. That's not the official name yet. So that's the
It hasn't been approved.
So it hasn't been approved yet. But so our new thing that we're going to do, because my food lab is in the building.
But we can get to it. Right?
You can get to it. Yeah. If you just search for the BHAN playlist, you'll find it. And so my new big announcement that I'm really excited about, that I guess it's not really official yet, but the lab's in a building that's being heavily renovated, so we can't do any of our videos. I usually partner with the UD Farm, which is literally right across the street, and we did a bunch of farm-to-table stuff in the fall. But now the lab's going to be closed, and I was like, what should we do? And one of my students said, let's cook at the parks. Those little hibachi grills that are at the park. So I know, that's the students, right? I mean, it's like, yeah. So we're hoping to partner with Newark Parks as sort of a cross promotion to push out some of this stuff. I mean, logistically, there's going to be some creative failures, I'm sure, and some videos that don't go up. But what a great learning experience. And so I think like I said, the driving force is really going to be from the students that we're training. And they teach us so much. So yeah, I think we've got to embrace the new mediums for messaging.
And the opportunity also for multi-generational connections.
Absolutely.
You know, we see that here all the time relative to STAR. But Brittany, how does that also help to facilitate the exercise? Like, do you find, you know, also from individuals engaging with the students that there's a motivation there?
Oh yeah, I think it goes both ways. We actually kind of touched on this right before our discussion, is that not only do you learn so much about the person that you're working with when you actually have one-on-one time with them, but you also get a wider perspective of just society as a whole. So recently, a lot of my students, and especially with the grad students, they're fresh out of undergrad, they don't have a whole lot of real world experience. So when they get to go out into the community and work in hospitals like Christiana Care or clinics like we have here, it's kind of a shock to their system to see, you know, individuals who are 20, 23 years old, healthy, happy, running upstairs all the time. And so I get a lot of feedback from my students in the fact of they don't realize the difficulties that come with, you know, getting older or the disease process, how it affects us both emotionally and physically. And inside some of my classes, I try and bring that aspect too. So we actually just recently talked about pulmonary disease. And pulmonary disease, it's very hard to get air in and to get air out, but it's hard to teach a 20 to 23-year-old what it's like, really, really like to not be able to breathe, especially when they're asking to do exercise. Because a lot of times people will just go, oh, you know, just get up and walk. Well, that's not always a reality for everybody. So recently I had my students walk up 3 flights of stairs while pinching their nose and breathing through a straw. And as they came down the stairs, these students were huffing and puffing, and it was the first experience of not being able to use their body to the full capacity that it's supposed to be working at. And they were shocked at just how challenging it was, and then we put that into perspective of this is somebody's norm all day, every day. So when you actually have the ability for younger, future healthcare individuals to go out and get first-hand experience and to be able to work with individuals, by the time they are the ones that are making policy changes or being able to be in their own clinics running the show, they have a much better perspective and understanding, and I think a just general appreciation for the clients that they're working with. I mean, we do have an uphill battle with trying to fight what society is putting out in all aspects of healthcare, but with the days of the primary care provider, the physician being the one last shop for everything, I think are starting to go away. We realize that nobody can know everything about human health. So we have new generations coming up that are specialized in very specific areas, who then can go out and provide the individualized care instead of, like I said, kind of the cookie cutter care that was, I think, a staple for a long time, because that's all we had and really all we were allowed to do. So I do see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think it's on the horizon. And I think that we're really spoiled in this area where we have a university that is health conscious, but also provides a lot of resources for both the training of the new generation, but also opportunities for the community to come in and access those, whether it's YouTube and mass media or being able to come into a seminar like today. So we're fighting the good fight.
Yes, indeed. And also the value of that integration, whether that's integrating from a multi-generational perspective or whether it's integrating care. You know, combining your behavioral health with primary care and with also specialty care, but also multidisciplinary team approach to care, adding new disciplines, like adding nutrition, you know, to the entire care team when we know that people can absolutely benefit from that, and adding health coaching, you know, for those, well, for all of us who may just need that extra support in achieving optimal health. So indeed, I believe the future looks bright. It may all come from the healthcare systems really trying to lead that, and hopefully society will follow suit. But I think this has been a wonderful evening together. And before we close, if there's not any questions or comments from the audience, maybe each of you can just have your final thoughts for us to take away with us tonight. Kristen, do you want to go first?
Sure, I can. I mean, have you read The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan? Yeah, that's one of my absolute favorites. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. And so one of his biggest pieces of advice, and he's not a nutrition professional, he's a journalist and a writer, is to eat real food, mostly plants, not too much, which is kind of nice, simple advice. But I think the biggest thing in terms of, overall is like Brittany's kind of emphasized, there's no one size fits all in terms of healthy eating. I think people tend to think that you have to eat certain things to be healthy, or you have to follow a certain eating plan, or things that are trendy, whether it's paleo or keto or whatever. I'm a firm believer that pretty much all of those things can be wrapped up into good health, but it needs to be personalized for the person. So like Brittany said, the days of a patient coming in and you kind of just give them the US, everyone remembers the food pyramid, and then off on your way, Godspeed and good luck. Those days are long over. So I think there are lots of ways to kind of tweak things to find something that works for you as an individual. But generally speaking, the more plants you can put on your plate, the better. So
plants.
Plants are where it's at.
All right.
It doesn't have to be all plants. No one has, you don't have to be vegan, you don't have to be vegetarian, but more plants is usually a good kind of general recommendation.
Okay, plants. Add that to your list.
They're where it's at.
Vanessa, what else should we? I heard some things you'd add to the list. Okay.
Yeah, I would say, kind of building on your food theme a little bit, if there were kind of one thing in addition to that 3 good things exercise that I would like to kind of plant a seed with people about, specifically in this arena of trying to become an expert on what you need more of in your life, is stop trying to get bread in a hardware store. And what I mean by that is that when we start to figure out what it is that we need in our lives, sometimes we keep trying to get it from people who are not particularly skilled at meeting that need. And so, like when I think about in my own marriage, when I would come home from working with really sick patients and sometimes encountering stories that just were heart-wrenching for me. My husband works in banking. He is not cut out to hear about my terrible day at the hospital without going, there were a couple times where I really literally got the sound that came out of him because he didn't sign up for that field. He didn't sign up to hear that story. He wasn't ready for it. He had no idea how to respond. And, so I needed bread and he had hammers. If what you need is hammers, that's great because he's got a lot of them. And so I think it's really important, it's just critical for us to recognize that us needing something, that's the end of the need to validate or support the fact that we need it. The fact that other people in your life aren't great at needing it doesn't mean you don't need it. It just means we've got to find the person who's good at that. So, in my personal story, what I realized was that I was setting my husband up to fail. I was asking him to be good at something that was just not going to be his strong suit, but there was this whole other list of things that he was great at, that when I asked him to do that instead, it really would help me. And it didn't mean don't get the need met. So for me, I started realizing that when I had days like that, if I reached out to a couple psychologist colleagues and said, oh, I had a really tough case, can anybody give me a little time to talk? I would routinely have 3 or 4 people write back to me within half an hour saying, hey, you want to go get a cup of coffee? And I would have just, the most fulfilling, satisfying conversation with them about that case. They were fantastic at meeting that need. And then I would go home and not need it anymore. And instead, could say, hey, make me laugh, because my husband's great at that, or crack me up, or help me be distracted for the rest of the night. So I think that idea of get your bread in a place where they make bread.
And Britt of that. What's that?
Right.
There's gluten-free bread. It's come a long way. It's a lot better than it used to.
And in terms of the physical activity, again, I can sit up here and talk to them blue in the face about the benefits, whether it's physiological or emotional. So again, you all know that physical activity is good. I'm going to take a blurb from Dr. Mike Evans, who has probably my favorite video on YouTube called 23 and a half hours, and some of you know where this is going. And so when it comes to, the challenges of balancing the day, the stresses, the emotional concept of everything is, when you actually think about your full day and prioritizing your health, really what I'm asking is not necessarily to give up time, but just to reduce the sitting and watching your TV, sleeping, eating, playing with the kids, being at work, driving to and from. Just limit all of that to only 23 and a half hours of the day instead of thinking about having to take out a huge chunk of whatever it is. You can still have everything that you want to do in your day and still get in that 30 minutes of physical activity. We just need to flip the way that we think about it into a more positive spin when we think about really the big chunk of the day. There is time, we just need to find it.
And I think too, for the 23 and a half hours, you can also integrate that physical activity
into a behavior
everything else that you talked about. Sometimes we're just not conscious enough to think about integrating the physical activity, eating the plants along the way. You can eat plants and have physical activity, right? And then also the 3 good things, and just being more aware of yourself and what you need. And I think the bread from the hardware store is a great analogy about, because it's not wrong to require bread, right? And just recognizing that. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Let's give a round of applause for our speakers. And we would love to invite you back. Our next session will be on July the 12th. And this will be Lessons Learned, a Disastrous Day of a Patient. And Healthcare Theater will be doing a performance for us relative to a disastrous day of a patient. And then we will have a panel discussion. So we hope if you're around in July that you return and join us. Thank you, everyone. There's still some healthy food over there. I'm sure there's some plants in that.
Thank you all for coming.